fire, a lot of these habitats will die out. So every few years, fires have to come through, and it's the only way that a lot of species of trees, that their seeds will actually open up so that they can grow new species. So we are focusing here on the bad fire, not the good fire. And this leads to obviously species loss for species that are caught in the main fire. Also the loss of their habitats, if they've got 100-year-old trees and they burnt down, where are these species going to look to live, these animals? Desertification and soil erosion. We have overgrazing as another cause, which leads to biodiversity loss and erosion. And then weak management. So for various reasons, whether you don't have the budget for management, you don't have the capability, or even just the will, you don't want to. Oops. Oh no. Then we have poverty. Poverty increases dependence on natural resources. So the people need the forest, they live off them. So they're going to be in there all the time, cutting down the trees, hunting for bushmeat, and so we're putting a lot more pressure on our ecosystems. And there's the misuse of resources, which is connected, species loss, which results from this, and the deforestation. There's also what we call an increased need for legal livelihood. So even though our governments have put in place logging bans, for example, people are so poor, they need to live off the land. So even though they know that there are park rangers patrolling, the military is there, they will find a way to log so that they can feed their children, so that they don't have an empty stomach themselves, they can support themselves. So that's a very strong effect of poverty on the environment. Human capacity loss. Another effect is tourism, and this is mismanaged tourism. There is obviously a lot of good tourism, not all tourism is bad, but tourism could cause harm to wildlife. For example, in the Philippines, in Cebu at the moment, it's very popular to go swimming with the whale sharks. Unfortunately, a lot of tour operators are feeding the whale sharks to attract them, which makes the whale sharks come up to the surface more, they're a bit more confident, they're not scared of humans anymore, and it's resulting in a lot of whale sharks getting harmed by propellers, which is really, really bad. So that's a good example of how we're physically harming wildlife, even though we seem to be doing a tourism for a good cause that we want to learn more about it. There's also obviously the pollution, the fragmentation of habitats and ecosystems, and the increased pressures on resources. A lot of people like to go to small islands, they're beautiful, but then islands do not have the resources to support the millions of people that want to go there. So that's very detrimental on the environment. We've come up with war or conflict, and this is a very big one these days, especially in North Africa and the Middle East. I know one of my friends is doing his PhD on this. And having these people fighting over resources, just fighting amongst each other and having big armies together can lead on increased pressure on resources. The armies are there, they need to eat, they need to live somewhere, and so the environment is suffering. There's obviously the pollution that they cause, habitat loss and wildlife harm, because sometimes the wildlife gets in the way. One of our favorite cause is corruption, and the effects are all of the above. Pretty much everything I've mentioned falls under this one. And finally, alien species. And the effects of this is, the biggest one is competition with native species. So native species are coming in, they're bigger than the native species, they're more effective, and so they're eating all the food. The native species eventually die out. There's also habitat loss. So these invasive species come in, they take over the habitat that was once for the natives. And again, we're losing our native species. And overconsumption. We find that most alien species around the world are aliens because they're very adaptable. They can live anywhere, eat anything, and as a result, they multiply very quickly. So instead of where we would have a native species of frogs, for example, that would have a population of 200, they have a certain impact. They consume a certain amount of food, whereas you get your cane toads in, and they just multiply so quickly that all of a sudden this area has populations in the thousands, and the plant life and anything that feeds it can't keep up with it, and so the environment then loses again. Are there any questions?
Okay, thank you very much. That ends our session 3. We know you want to contribute more, but we have to go forward. So session 4.